Hello and welcome viewers, I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump has described his second UK state visit as one of the greatest honours of his life during a banquet at Windsor Castle hosted by King Charles III. He spoke of the unique and enduring bond between the US and the United Kingdom, likening their relationship to two harmonious notes in a chord. Donald Trump has celebrated the cancellation of Jimmy Kimmel's late-night show, calling it great news for America. In a post on his social media platform, Trump has praised ABC for its decision, criticizing Kimmel's talent and ratings. China has dropped its antitrust investigation into Google, signaling a shift in its regulatory stance as trade talks with the US intensify. The probe, which began in February, centered on Google's dominance in the smartphone market and its impact on Chinese companies like Oppo and Xiaomi. US President Donald Trump announced new sanctions against left-wing groups following the killing of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk, specifically targeting anti-fascist movement Antifa by designating it a terrorist organization. The World Health Organization's chief, Tedros Adhanom, has now warned that Israel's ground offensive in northern Gaza has pushed hospitals to the brink of collapse. He has described the escalating violence and evacuation orders as forcing displaced families into increasingly cramped and unsafe conditions. He has urged for an end to their condition and has stressed that hospitals are overwhelmed and unable to receive life-saving supplies. Iran has expressed its readiness to reach a fair and balanced solution with European powers regarding its nuclear program following talks with Britain, France and Germany. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has emphasized that the solution should serve mutual interest and requires an independent approach by the European nations. The Indian government has acknowledged the signing of a strategic defence pact between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, noting that it had been aware of the discussions which have been ongoing for a while. The pact, which formalizes a long-standing security partnership, comes amid growing concerns in the Gulf over Israel's actions. In France, unions led a day of protests against looming budget cuts, with teachers, train drivers and hospital staff joining the strike. Teenagers also blocked school entrances in solidarity, demanding an end to pension reforms and fiscal austerity. The protests coincide with growing public discontent over planned government spending cuts and tax policies. Alright viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. Walt Disney-owned ABC has announced that it will indefinitely suspend airing Jimmy Kimmel Live after the late-night host made some controversial comments about the killing of Charlie Kirk, drawing severe criticism from the head of the Federal Communications Commission. US President Donald Trump has celebrated the indefinite suspension of Jimmy Kimmel's late-night talk show and has used the opportunity to not only praise its cancellation but also broaden his long-standing criticism of other late-night hosts. So now in his Truth Social post, he has focused on Kimmel's fellow late-night comedians Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers, who have also been frequent critics of his presidency and have called the two TV hosts quote-unquote total losers. Now, fans of Jimmy Kimmel, meanwhile, have criticized the decision and gathered outside the El Capitan Entertainment Center in order to protest ABC's decision to pull the show off air. With us on the broadcast is Mark Sutherland. He is a geopolitical commentator joining us live from London. Thank you so much, sir, for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. There's been a lot of sharp criticism from Trump's political opponents with regards to what's transpired. We've also seen Stephen Colbert's The Late Show being recently cancelled as well, although the CBS stated that was a purely financial decision. People have come out and called this a curb on free speech, and some have also stated that political violence by one disturbed individual must not be exploited as justification for broader censorship and control. Do you concur with this?
Yeah, good to join you. Let's just go back. The awful events of Charlie Kirk's murder, which was, of course, filmed, which went viral in front of his children. His wife is beyond the words, and those kind of actions should not be happening and not supported in one iota. One of the things that Charlie Kirk did was to have debate and to have a conversation. The other thing is that people need to remember that when we say things on the internet, when we print things and say and put things out there, they are there forever. The talk has been about a polarization within America. And as you fully appreciate, because we're on the internet now doing a show, is the fact that it's this whole thing of cultural influences. And as people say, America is then polarized to some extent. It may not be as polarized as many actually think. People were shocked by what they saw. And they've also been shocked by then the remarks that have been made afterwards. I understand what you are saying in regard to free speech. We need to go back for a number of years, even back to the first Trump administration, when the Democrats, people like Maxine Waters were then saying, you know, in regard to people that voted for Donald Trump, you need to get in their face and be verbal and tell them what you think, or words to that effect. There is nothing like, it's important to have a debate, but Kimmel has had a big platform until ABC then pulled that as part of the Disney network. With what I then read, then he then turned around and offers his condolences to the Kirk family. And personally, he should have then stopped there, because of this war that has then happened, where within the propaganda, they are turning around and saying that the individual, Tyler Robinson, that actually sadly murdered Charlie Kirk, then saying, well, actually, you know, he had Republican leanings and all this kind of thing. In these incidences, we have to then wait and wait for all of the evidence to come forward, etc. But our big challenge is that when you have a news cycle that constantly needs comments, when you see air that needs to be filled, then people feel that they have to make an opinion and say something. And really, they need to be far more guarded over that. In regard to the whole thing of free speech, well, the Republicans quite rightly would then turn around and say, well, what's happened under the Biden administration, under the Biden administration, what happened with, particularly with Jan 6, and you arrest 1,600 people for expressing their free speech because they were concerned over the election results in 2020. It's a massive subject, but I also believe we have huge responsibility in how we conduct ourselves and the comments that we then made. And I come back to it. Someone was murdered under horrific circumstances, and it was filmed, and it went viral, and it will be out there for years and years to come. It will be out there as Charlie Kirk's dear children then grow up. That could be then shown day after day after day. Plus, I will end with this. On the Republican side, if we look at people like Rand Paul, when they were virtually assaulted in the street, with people, Brett Kavanaugh, people getting round his house after being doxxed. These people think that this kind of behavior is acceptable. It is not, but I don't have to tell you that in regard to history of many other countries where we've lost the art of being respectful to the other side and actually having a debate. And I say this, that is all that Charlie Kirk actually believed in, which was to have a debate and speak words and not turn to violence. Sorry, Pia.
Indeed, he was known for engaging in dialogue, particularly with the younger generation, the Gen Z. So I request you to stay on with us. We're getting some reactions as well. We're now learning that a number of Democratic lawmakers have now assailed the decision, stating that free speech is under attack. There have been several reactions on social media, which have been swift and varied. Prominent figures have been weighing in on the controversy surrounding ABC's decision. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has criticized the move as part of a larger coordinated effort to stifle free speech, calling the actions of those in power as dangerous for democracy. Adam Schiff, U.S. Senator for California, has also denounced what he described as a direct attack on the press and the freedom of expression, highlighting the Trump administration's increasing pressure on media outlets. Chuck Schumer, U.S. Senator for New York, has stressed upon the importance of defending free speech and has urged both sides of the political spectrum to speak out against the situation. Additionally, Elizabeth Warren, U.S. Senator for Massachusetts, has raised concerns about Trump's growing influence over media, arguing that his tactics of silencing dissent are undermining democracy. Meanwhile, TV host Michael Costa has also voiced his alarm, urging TV networks to stand up against what he sees as a dangerous precedent for censorship. That's not all. TV host Don Lemon has also warned that the indefinite preemption of Jimmy Kimmel Live should send a chilling message to Americans, stressing upon the broader implications for free speech in the country. And last but not the least, Democratic National Committee Chairman Ken Martin has condemned the Trump administration's efforts to what he claims is a crackdown on free speech, emphasizing how the government has, quote-unquote, weaponized its power to restrict media access and silence opposition voices. These high-profile reactions continue to fuel in, fueling the debate over this controversy. Mr. Sutherland, I'd like to rope you in once again. I'd also like to bring forth the reaction that has been put forth by U.S. President Donald Trump. He's, of course, hailed the cancellation that has taken place. He stated that it had to be done. But what's also interesting is that he's also taken a dig at other late-night comedians, including Jimmy Fallon, including Seth Meyers, and called them total losers. Is that really warranted at this stage?
Well, you should then add Stephen Colbert, where a dear friend of mine was actually smeared and ridiculed by him. But that's another thing. Just to quickly go back to the names that you have actually named, like Schiff, Schumer, etc., Gavin Newsom, and others. They are all, as far as I'm concerned, on the left side of politics. And I would turn around and say that it suited them over the 4 years of the Biden administration to then ridicule Republicans, ridicule patriots. So that is what has gone on. They want free speech. That's why people went to America, to the Washington, D.C. on Jan 6, 2021 to exercise their free speech and their constitutional rights. We could cynically say that it suits people when it suits people. In regard to what President Trump has said, remember, as people have pointed out, because of Donald Trump's record in regard to The Apprentice, in regard having one of the biggest TV shows ever, in particular in America and around the world, and also his links in regard to the media, to his reactions is then not surprising as you go back in history. We have to remember that Obama turned around and said that President Trump, he will never be president in a media dinner. I believe in 2015. And also we look at Russia, we look at the court cases, we look at the weaponization of the law by the Democrats against him. So he is bearing all that in mind in regard to his comments, because these comedians, yes, we have a free speech to say, have constantly made pot shots at him, hence why his reaction. But we have to remember this: Charlie Kirk is someone who we knew, was a friend of his wife. They are friends. The other thing is that Charlie Kirk, as you said just before this, that he engaged with Gen Zs, he engaged in young people to create debate and also to challenge them from a biblical point of view, from an American Constitution point of view, from a patriot point of view, to get them to think of the foundings and the true values of America. And that is what he did. The comedians, etc., constantly challenge that, because they would then put themselves under the progressive mandate. You ask a very important question, like others, in regard to free speech. But as I say, this shooting, comments that people have made certain individuals have then turned that in where it's very, very political. And of course, on the opposite side of the aisle, in regard to the Democrats having been shellacked in the presidential election that happened last year, they are then recoiling about that. They also have, the whole Jan 6 committee, as I said, all the court cases, all the accusations against Trump, etc. They have tried everything to make sure that he would never run again. So Trump is also speaking from that point of view in regard to all that came against him, and having seen a friend of his killed, basically you could say live on the internet, on television, in an appalling and outrageous way. This is a very difficult line at times in regard, of course, into free speech at times, and how certain things would then be interpreted. And in regard to American society, free speech, that, as you would say, we would say, it sounds as though I'm contradicting myself in one way, that this is everything. But also, we have a responsibility, I believe, to then be respectful and how we then speak about that. But speaking the truth is also very important, and it's uncomfortable sometimes for people then to hear that. Pia.
All right, sir, I request you to stay on with us. You've in fact pointed out something quite interesting. It seems that the gulf between the right and the left is only widening. Meanwhile, more news coming in from within the United States. We're now learning that US Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates for the first time since December, cutting the benchmark rate by a 1/4 percentage point to a range of about 4% to 4.25%. However, this move was not unanimous. Newly appointed Fed Governor Stephen Miran has dissented, calling for a larger 1/2 percentage point rate cut. Now, Powell has noted that the recent pace of job creation is rather slow, and a rise in layoffs could in fact drive unemployment up even further. He's also indicated that more rate cuts are likely in the months ahead in order to in fact address economic slowdown. That's not all. He's also pointed out to the fact that inflation has been taking place as well, and he's pointed towards Donald Trump's tariffs with regards to that. Take a look.
We have begun to see goods prices showing through into higher inflation, and actually the increase in goods prices accounts for most of the increase in inflation, or perhaps all of the increase in inflation over the course of this year. Those are not very large effects at this point, and we do expect them to continue to build over the course of the rest of the year and into next year. And it's also possible that there may be effects on employment, but that I would say if you're looking at why employment is doing what it's doing, that's much more about the change in immigration. So the supply of workers has obviously come way down. There's very little growth, if any, in the supply of workers. And at the same time, demand for workers has also come down quite sharply. Over the course of this year, we've kept our policy at a restrictive level, and people have different views, but a clearly restrictive level, I would say. So, and we were able to do that over the course of this year because the labor market was in very solid condition with strong job creation and all those things. I think if you go back to April and now look at the revised job creation numbers for May, June, July, and August, I can no longer say that. So what that means is that the risks were clearly tilted toward inflation. I would say they're moving toward equality. Maybe they're not quite out of equality. We don't need to know that.
All right, there, of course, we've heard what exactly the US Federal Reserve Chair has had to say. Mr. Sutherland still with us on the broadcast. This is very interesting because it comes as Donald Trump has been rallying against the Federal Reserve. He's been criticizing it. He's been threatening Powell as well, and he's been demanding to get his own way on the interest rates. He's been pressurizing Powell and demanding that he lower the interest rates for quite a while now. Donald Trump claims that this would help boost the US economy. So it makes sense that the newly appointed Fed governor has, of course, called for a further cut. That's not all. We also see Donald Trump attempting to remove Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve 7-member board as well. One of the courts did allow her to stay as a member, but we are expecting a legal showdown very soon with regards to that as well. What do you make of this Trump versus Federal Reserve war? We do know the Federal Reserve has been a largely independent body so far.
Well, Lisa Cook has her own problems in regard to the accusations over a mortgage on a house, and especially as someone who is then in a decision making to work out how high interest rates are. You make a very interesting point in regard to the independence then of the Federal Reserve, as I've always encouraged people to look at the history of the Federal Reserve, especially a book written by G. Edward Griffin about that, because it poses some very, very interesting issues in regard to the whole thing of central banking and who then controls that. Trump is turning around. He has turned around, has been very critical of Powell, of saying that the Federal Reserve has not acted quickly by then coming down by 0.25%, because, as you've just said in your piece, he was extremely worried about inflation, and now the concern is in regard to the job market. The figures that came out have said that the job market figures were not as good as maybe as they were expected. Where Trump, for a number of weeks, I've even commented on NewsX about this, has been screaming, shouting, being polite, maybe not, and at times impolite, at Powell turning around and saying, you need to lower interest rates. We look at how COVID had the huge effect on the COVID lockdowns on the American economy. Many pop and mum shops were then shut down, and the big warehouse and the big businesses, Amazon, etc., then just carried on. It devastated the American economy, and it's about having the fact that you could borrow at a cheaper rate to then expand your business. The reference to immigration is very interesting, because I am sure that within America then is looking at its skill base, as Trump is working hard, as we've discussed, to get businesses back into America, get either Apple back there producing phones. It's also had big investment from Swiss pharmaceutical industry to start building factories. That's what Trump wants. It's about getting manufacturing back, because under NAFTA or GAFTA since 1982 as well, there have been many factories, many manufacturing bases that have left America and also gone to China, which we have talked about as well. So this now is going to play out, because, as you refer to the fact that could have been gone straight to 0.5% from 0.25%. The concern would be, how do you balance inflation? Because now it is about jobs, and that is what the concern is of the president. Pia.
Absolutely, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, joining us on NewsX World, sharing your analysis of what's transpiring within the United States of America. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus to more updates coming in, we're now learning that the families of 4 passengers who lost their lives in the tragic Air India 171 crash in June have now filed a lawsuit in the United States against Boeing and Honeywell, accusing the companies of negligence. The suit claims faulty fuel switches were responsible for the crash, which took place shortly after takeoff from Ahmedabad, in which 260 people lost their lives. Now, according to the lawsuit, both Boeing and Honeywell were aware of the risks but failed to take action despite a 2018 FAA advisory urging operators to inspect the fuel switches. The families allege that this oversight contributed to the catastrophic accident, with the companies doing quote-unquote nothing to prevent the disaster. Boeing, meanwhile, has declined to comment, Meanwhile, the Israeli military has stated that it has opened an additional route to allow civilians to leave, but conditions remain dire and many fear permanent displacement. Additionally, Israel insists that the latest operations are aimed at wiping out Hamas, announcing that its forces targeted a weapons depot in Gaza City. Footage released by the IDF shows the strike destroying explosives. The IDF claims this was meant for an attack on its own troops. Meanwhile, in Khan Yunis and Rafah, the IDF reports killing militants and destroying military sites, including underground tunnels. But in the meantime, we do know that the World Health Organization has also stated that hospitals are on the brink of collapse in Gaza. It's further urged for humanitarian corridors for aid for the Gazans at the moment. With us on the broadcast is Professor Ephraim Inbar, Senior Researcher at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you so much for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. We've also recently seen reports of a death toll in Gaza increasing to more than 65,000 ever since the war had commenced on the 7th of October in 2023 after the terrorist attack had taken place in Israel. At this moment, it seems that the ground offensive is only escalating. We do see a lot of international pressure with European countries coming out and stating that they will be recognizing Palestine. We also see a lot of domestic pressure being put on Netanyahu, with the families of hostages coming out protesting on the streets and asking Netanyahu to cease the offensive to make sure that a hostage deal is finally reached with Hamas. Where do you see the war heading to next? Do you think Netanyahu will buckle down to this pressure?
It seems that the Israeli government is determined to conquer Gaza City in order to make sure that Hamas is no longer ruling the Gaza Strip. This is the international consensus that Hamas has to leave Gaza and to be disarmed. This cannot be done without the use of force. I don't see any international resolution, any UN agency taking a decision and implementing it. So the only body left to implement the international consensus is Israel. And this is by taking the Gaza City and expelling the Gaza terrorists from the area.
All right, sir, I request you to stay on with us. We're tracking further developments. The President of the United Nations General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, has now issued a strong call in light of what's taking place in Gaza. Let's listen into what she said.
We have the high-level international conference for the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solutions. This is a chance to address reality that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict cannot be resolved by endless war, continued occupation and terror. The only way to ensure that both Israelis and Palestinians can live in lasting peace, security and dignity is the two-state solution. It is crystal clear that international humanitarian law calls for the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. They must be protected always. And I've been also crystal clear on that one in the past, in the speeches, but I'm here again, that civilians must not be targeted.
The UNGA president has emphasized that the misuse of civilian places for military purposes is a breach of the Geneva Convention. She has stated that the conflict cannot be solved through endless war or terror, and she's also stressed that a two-state solution is a path to lasting peace and security. What's interesting is her words come just ahead as world leaders are going to gather in New York for the annual UN meeting later this month. Professor Inbar still with us on the broadcast. As I pointed out earlier, we are expected to see several countries vote on a resolution that France is going to bring forward. We've seen France, the United Kingdom, interestingly, Belgium and Australia stating that they will be recognizing the state of Palestine in the upcoming UNGA session. What do you make of their statements? Would this recognition merely be symbolic? Because we do know that it is the UNSC that truly has the voice that counts for what could change the reality on the ground?
I think it's the UN is a morally bankrupt institution, and it is very much biased against Israel. So I don't think the UN has any voice in this matter. Actually, the two-state solution is something that Israel is not opposed to. Actually, we've seen recently a three-state solution: Israel, a state in Gaza ruled by Hamas, and another area ruled by the PLO in the West Bank. And this didn't bring any peace because the Palestinians are committed to terrorism against Israel. If you take polls among the Palestinians, 80% of them support Hamas and the atrocities that were committed on October 7th. I don't think that you can establish a nice Palestinian state that is ready to live peacefully next to Israel with this population. So the UN and many other countries can make statements as long as it takes, but it doesn't change the position of the Palestinians on the destruction of Israel. There were many attempts to change the education system in the Palestinian territories, and it didn't help. They continue to hate the Jews and Israel and act upon their hatred. So it is simply not very helpful to have statements in New York when on the ground the Palestinians continue their terrorist campaign and terrorist activities against the Jewish state.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us. We're tracking some breaking developments, this time coming from Syria. Now, according to a senior Syrian foreign ministry official, Syria is set to strike security agreements with Israel by the end of 2025. According to reports, this development comes as Syria's foreign minister Asad al-Shaibani prepares to make a rare visit to Washington on today itself, marking the first such visit in over 25 years. Professor Inbar, what do you make of these latest reports that have come in Syria likely to strike security agreements with Israel? We do know that there have been the US has been mediating, has ensured that diplomatic channels are and communication channels between Israel and Syria continue.
I think Israelis welcome any attempt by Syria to try to normalize relations with Israel or to have a more limited defense agreement. And I just wait to see it happen. I am not that sure that it will happen by the end of the year, but we have to be patient, and maybe the regime in Syria, which is supported by Turkey, which is very anti-Israeli, will indeed sign such a deal with Israel.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, this is all we have for this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned.